Georgian experts, journalists, Armenian and Georgian influentials are in Yerevan these days. The visit is a statement on dynamic bilateral cooperation. Deputy Foreign Minister of Georgia, Lasha Darsalia, soon joins Armenian and Georgian policymakers to smooth out any wrinkles. After a courteous exchange of pleasantries, experts hit the high-pitched notes: EU-Georgia relations and Armenian exports impeded at the Georgian border. The common cultural background is emphatically held up throughout discussions for problems to dissolve contours against it. Thank you for this opportunity.
My pleasure.
Would you say that there's a unifying cultural perception in Georgia, that Georgia and Armenia are the only Christian nations in the region?
Yes, that's a major factor when we speak about alignments between our two nations, and of course that historically been the case, is the case, and will continue to be the case. However, in this world of different competitive interests, of course, thinking of something else which could realign our interests and make us more competitive, on top of the religion, which is, again, to emphasize, not less important, but having sustainable economy, having sustainable security system, having viable foreign policies, of course, very much on top of agenda. That's something which we have to explore and dig into details.
If we speak about the general society, would you say that state interest comes before cultural sympathies?
To some extent, yes, and that's not something, which we like or dislike. That's the reality, and that's the reality of the world, and we have to look into the eyes of the truth and accept it as it is. So the reality is less values-driven, more interest-driven, more about prevailing, more about dominating, and that's something which we should take into account very closely.
Georgia's clouded relations with the EU leave their mark on Armenia's political horizon. How does Georgia's backslide affect Armenia's chances with the EU? Despite the growing distance between the EU and Georgia, the Georgian government says they support Armenia's European aspirations. Georgia-EU relations affect Armenia's chances with the EU. Does your government think of resolving the crisis with the EU?
Well, it depends how we would define the resolution, and that's something which the EU has proposed to us when they've granted us the candidacy status. Initially, there were 12 conditions for us to comply with, then those 12 conditions been encapsulated into the 9 conditions, so that's the roadmap for Georgia to open accession talks with the European Union. The process which has been suspended from both ends and from the EU perspective due to Georgia's non-compliance with EU expectations and that roadmap. So that's something which we have to emphasize. Unfortunately, regretfully, Georgia, which has always been the front runner of the European integration process in the region, now is a bit lagging behind, to put it mildly. As for Georgia's Armenia's duo, just forgetting for a second those downsides on the Georgia's end, of course, re-entrenching our European appeal by Armenia and Georgia acting together or aligning their interests or combining their efforts would give a stronger voice to Georgian positions and a stronger emphasis to Armenian positions. That's about that very meaningful part of the small patch of land which is called South Caucasus to be highly on the radars of our European partners. So again, to repeat, it's one case when we're acting alone, on our own, and it's completely different case when we're acting together. That is, to rephrase myself, about an added value for Georgia's foreign policy expectations when Armenia stands next to it, and likewise, it's about Armenia having Georgia next to Armenia's positions.
Do you see political will on the side of Georgian authorities to improve relations with the EU?
It's a bit tricky issue, and I have to be direct to your question when framing my response, and the response would be as follows. These days, unfortunately, there is a divergence between policies by the Georgian authorities and the will of predominant part of Georgian society. So an awkward awkward response comes with awkward question. Those two tracks run separately these days. It's a sad reality, it's very regrettable, but that's something which I have to mention, emphasize necessarily. At this point in time, unfortunately, there is not much consistency how the Georgian government, the Georgian authorities, how the ruling party portrays Georgia versus its European partners, and how Georgian people, or the most part of Georgian society, I'm not speaking about all, of course, Georgian Dream has its own voters, and that type of anti-Western approach, which is confused or which is sometimes connotated under the definitions of keeping the Georgian identity, protecting sovereignty, etc., but it's also always a big question mark that has nothing to deal with pro-European path. Being a member of European Union is about pooling resources for protecting that very same identity and that very same sovereignty. So, of course, that type of disinformation war, which regretfully become the reality of the Georgian politics, and which is not indeed consistent or compliant with expectations of the Georgian people, is that big challenge which we're facing today, and we have to resolve eventually, and the sooner the better.
Logistically, though, last checkpoint on Armenia-Georgia border, the diaphragm, a blockaded Armenia, does not always let in cargo, causing economic spasms that brotherly well-wishing does not cure. New mechanisms of regulation might. Back to Armenia-Georgia relations. Armenian brandy producers have been blocked at last checkpoint, suffering financial damage. This is a pattern that keeps reoccurring. Why do Georgian authorities impede Armenian exports? We've heard the official statements, but is there a geopolitical trace, or is it the local producers blocking? What's behind, what underlies these impediments?
To start with, it came out quite unexpectedly. That is very unpleasant instance or accident in bilateral relations. We've had about very high assessments by Georgian officials and by Armenian officials about the level or the quality of those bilateral relations. So I very much hope that that would be the last exception to the rule. As for geopolitical implications, I've not seen a smoking gun, so it's really difficult to acknowledge and to speak with certainty if there are any geopolitical implications. But again, to reiterate my response, it's extremely unpleasant, and I also have to admit, so far, from my personal standpoint, I've not seen enough explanations or sufficient explanations from the Georgian authorities which could clarify the issue and be satisfying, not just for Armenian audience, but for the Georgian audience too.
Well, the last blocking of the imports coincided with Lavrov's visit to Yerevan. Is this sufficient enough to claim this more than a time coincidence and rather a reason?
Although I said that we have to be very careful when making an assessment from a geopolitical standpoint or through geopolitical optics. But again, in the world in the way in which we live, and taking into account all the volatility and implications of this very complex region, which is the South Caucasus, which is a soft belly of Russia, and which is about the Russian strategic depths to its southern borders. Of course, nothing could be ruled out. But as I've said, at this point, especially in relation to the Armenian brandy, there is not enough evidentiary basis for us to speak in one way or another.
Access to Asian markets through Iran is blocked because of Iran-Israel conflict. What's the common agenda Georgia and Armenia should develop in the face of the crisis in Middle East?
First of all, the crisis in the Middle East is still in the progress. It's unfolding. And when we try to speak about long-term projections, of course, it's very hard at this point because we are not yet there. We are not yet at the end of the crisis, so we have yet to see what would be political consequences and security consequences of the crisis. So working out a long, sustainable policies would be a bit premature. But on another side, when it comes down to Georgia's and Armenia's security, I always keep saying security has two dimensions. And it's not just about external dimension, it's not about membership in security alliances, it's not about just the military perceptions, it's not about just the weaponry, but it's also about domestic politics. It's about your institutional capacity building, it's about competitiveness of your economy. So regardless what's happening around us, something which we have to pay very close attention to, we two nations, two compact nations, still have a lot of work, and that work goes to our home exercise, and that's something which we don't have to overlook, and that's something which we don't have, where we don't have to look for some external excuses for a failure on our domestic side.
A mild diplomatic approach to neighborly policies is the mark of Armenia-Georgia relations, while serious issues in a turbulent region remain to be addressed in unison. As you know, Armenia-Azerbaijan negotiations are in progress, and Georgia is the third actor in South Caucasus. What's the role that the Georgian authorities could perform, or perhaps do perform backstage, to bring peace to pass in South Caucasus?
To start with, not take us the most. No, I don't think. In the recent past, we came across different allegations, but I think that in general, Georgia kept its policies of equidistance and being equally supportive from all sides, from all angles of the conflicts in terms of accomplishing and achieving stability and order in the South Caucasus, eliminating the last remnants of Azerbaijani-Armenia's conflict is not just in the best interests of Azerbaijan in Armenia. I keep saying it's also in the national interest of Georgia, because that eventually translates into a more appealing image of the South Caucasus. And that could be the uniting factor for all the three nations.
And that translates into economic growth, to say the least, and more investment inflow.
Absolutely.
The prime ministers of Georgia and Armenia signed a strategic partnership recently. What's your evaluation of the document? Does it cover the whole range, the whole spectrum of bilateral relations? Is there untapped potential that has probably not made its way into the document?
I think it does. It does. And it just putting in black and white what we've been doing before, enhancing that level of cooperation, something which was long due, to be honest. But now that formality is dealt with, the roadmap is there in terms of legalese, in terms of political declaration. But we should also remind ourselves that putting signatures and inking papers, it's really a great accomplishment, but providing with meaningful substance, with meaningful content, is a difficult job, is more important. And I would be very much expecting that both sides would do the most they can to complete, the second leg of exercise, which is about bringing substance, which is about feeling with a real, tangible, and result-driven content.
Peace is the lubricant of economic growth, and economic growth starts with proper infrastructure. Does Georgia have an interest in investing in the infrastructure with Armenia, or coming up with joint projects, the Crossroad of Peace, for example?
That's the most interesting point, which we have to be very much bold to discuss and very much innovative as well. I mentioned earlier today that thinking about business ecosystems, which is about creating or setting up common economic zones, thinking of some other innovative ideas which probably would be a bit away from this single market and by a singularity of the markets. Of course, Azerbaijan could not be excluded for obvious reasons, but at this point of time, since the process between Armenia and Azerbaijan is still ongoing and is not formalized, I think it's plenty of room for us, for Armenia and Georgia, to advance on that path and to lay down some good and solid conditions or preconditions for amplifying the attractiveness and investment appeal of the South Caucasus.
Thank you for this opportunity.
My pleasure.